My high school bully applied for a job at my company until I fired him in the lobby. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The moment security handed Marcus his cardboard box, he finally looked into my eyes and realized exactly who I was. The sound of the heavy cardboard scraping against his expensive watch echoed through the massive, glass-walled lobby of my company. It's a beautiful building, all sleek lines, polished concrete, and natural light. I designed it to be a sanctuary, a place where brilliant minds could collaborate without fear. I built this tech firm from a cramped, leaky garage into an industry leader over 10 agonizing, sweat-soaked years. I'm David, the CEO and founder, and for the last decade, my singular focus has been creating a culture where toxicity goes to die. I wanted to build the exact opposite of the environments I survived when I was younger. As Marcus stood there, flanked by two towering security guards, his smug, corporate mask completely dissolved. The arrogant smirk that had defined his face for as long as I could remember was replaced by a pale, trembling realization. He wasn't just being fired. He was being erased from the professional map by the very person he used to treat like absolute garbage. I watched his eyes dart around the open-plan floor above us, looking at the dozens of employees who had stopped working just to watch his downfall. This wasn't just a termination. This was a long-overdue reckoning. People always say that living well is the best revenge, and for a long time, I believed them. I thought making millions, scaling a business, and employing hundreds of people would finally silence the ghosts of my past. But some ghosts don't just fade away. They walk right through your front door wearing a tailored suit and a fake smile, asking for a paycheck. When you build a fortress to protect your team, you have to be ready to execute anyone who tries to poison the well. Standing in that lobby, holding the undeniable proof of his corporate theft, I felt a twisted sense of poetic justice. But to understand how we ended up in this lobby, staring each other down while security waited for my nod, we have to go back. I needed to remember the exact moment my high school tormentor shattered my reality. The smell of cheap body spray and bleach always takes me straight back to the Westview High locker room. I was 17, severely underweight, and incredibly quiet, the perfect target for someone who needed to feel big. Marcus wasn't just a bully. He was an artist of humiliation. He didn't just shove you into lockers. He orchestrated public events to strip away your dignity. I vividly remember a Tuesday afternoon after gym class. I had just finished my sketches for a regional coding competition, something I had poured hundreds of hours into. It was my only ticket out of my chaotic household. Marcus and his friends cornered me. He didn't punch me. He just smiled that devastatingly charismatic smile, took my notebook, and methodically ripped every single page into tiny confetti while the rest of the team laughed. "Nobody cares about your little computer drawings, Davy," he had whispered, tossing the shredded paper over my head like a twisted celebration. "You're always going to be a loser working for guys like me." That specific moment broke something fundamental inside me. I stopped speaking up in class. I started skipping lunch to hide in the library. My confidence was completely obliterated, replaced by a deep, hollow anxiety that kept me awake for years. But eventually, that crushing pain metabolized into something else, an absolute, burning obsession to succeed. While Marcus peaked in high school, coasting on his athletic charm and his parents' money, I was teaching myself advanced data architecture in a dark bedroom. I used the echoes of his laughter as a metronome for my work ethic. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered the sound of my life's work tearing in his hands. It took years of therapy to stop flinching when someone raised their voice, but the drive he accidentally instilled in me built a multi-million-dollar tech empire. I thought I had left him and that miserable town in the rearview mirror forever. I thought I was entirely safe in the corporate kingdom I had meticulously constructed. But fate has a sick sense of humor when you finally feel completely secure. Fast forward 15 years. It was a completely normal Tuesday morning in my corner office. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and we were gearing up for a major product launch. My HR director, Sarah, knocked lightly and walked in. Sarah is a brilliant, no-nonsense executive in her mid-40s who has an incredible instinct for talent. "David, I think I've found our new rock star for the mid-level project management role," she said, beaming as she handed me a sleek, thick portfolio. His metrics are off the charts, his references rave about his leadership, and he absolutely crushed the culture fit interview yesterday. I smiled, trusting her judgment implicitly, and casually flipped the folder open. The breath instantly left my lungs. Staring back at me from the top of the resume was a polished, professional headshot of Marcus. He was older, his jawline slightly softer, his hair perfectly styled, but the arrogant glimmer in his eyes was exactly the same. My hands actually started to shake. The name printed in bold letters, Marcus Vance, made my stomach violently drop. I felt a sudden, terrifying regression. For a split second, I wasn't a 32-year-old CEO in a custom suit. I was that terrified 17-year-old kid covered in shredded paper in a damp locker room. "David, are you all right? You look like you've just seen a ghost," Sarah asked, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. I forced myself to take a deep, steadying breath, gripping the edge of my mahogany desk to anchor myself in the present reality. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Our company prides itself on objective, data-driven hiring, and I didn't want to look like a vindictive tyrant acting on decades-old personal grudges. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just a sudden headache." I lied smoothly, closing the folder to hide his face. I asked her to leave the file with me so I could review his technical background in detail before giving the final sign-off. As soon as she closed the heavy oak door, I felt completely sick. The man who had made my teenage years a living hell was now asking me for a job. I sat in total silence and realized he had no idea who I was. My company, Apex Solutions, operates under a parent LLC that I deliberately named using a series of obscure acronyms. Because of our rapid growth and my personal preference for staying out of the media spotlight, my face isn't plastered all over our corporate website. To the outside world, and certainly to an external applicant, I was just a faceless executive. Marcus had absolutely no clue that the David listed as the founder was the Davey he used to torment. I needed to see him in action before I made a move. I pulled up the recorded video feed from his final round of technical interviews with our department leads. Sitting alone in my office, I watched him work the room through my monitor. It was sickeningly fascinating. He was incredibly slick, deploying all the right corporate buzzwords: synergy, agile deployment, paradigm shifts. He mirrored the body language of my executives, laughed at their jokes, and projected an aura of absolute confidence. But beneath the polished veneer, I could see the cracks. When asked detailed, granular questions about project bottlenecks, his answers were vague, leaning heavily on delegating to subordinates. He was charming his way through a job he clearly wasn't technically qualified to handle. "I believe in empowering junior team members to handle the microtasks while I steer the macro vision," Marcus said on the recording, flashing that signature smile. It was a masterful deflection. My executives bought it completely, blinded by his charisma and outward confidence. I paused the video, staring at his frozen, smiling face on my screen. All my instincts, all my lingering trauma, screamed at me to hit the reject button. It would take one email to Sarah to end this. I could banish him back to the job market and never think about him again. It would be the easiest, safest decision of my life. But a darker, more curious part of me hesitated. Had he actually grown up? Was it possible that the cruel teenager had evolved into a capable, empathetic adult? Or was he the exact same predator, just operating in a different jungle? I needed to know the truth before I completely closed the door on him. For 3 days, I agonized over the decision. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with catastrophic scenarios of Marcus destroying the safe, collaborative culture I had so carefully cultivated. My therapist always told me that taking back my power meant facing my triggers, not just avoiding them. If I simply rejected his application anonymously, I would still be running away from him. I realized that right now, in this building, I held absolute power. If he was still a monster, I had the resources, the authority, and the perfect environment to catch him and hold him accountable. I wouldn't be a victim this time. I would be the judge. I called Sarah into my office on Friday morning. "I've reviewed Marcus Vance's portfolio," I said, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "Let's bring him on board for a 90-day probationary period. Put him on the Delta Project." Sarah was thrilled, completely unaware of the psychological war game I was initiating. The Delta Project was a high-stakes, data-heavy initiative handled primarily by our junior analytics team. It was the perfect pressure cooker. If Marcus had genuinely changed, He would mentor the young team and help them succeed. If he hadn't, the pressure would force his true colors to the surface incredibly fast. When the official hiring paperwork crossed my desk for a final signature, I stared at his name for a long time. My pen hovered over the dotted line. I was willingly inviting a known virus into my healthy system. It was an enormous gamble, one that could potentially hurt my employees if I wasn't incredibly vigilant. But I promised myself that the second he stepped out of line, I would bring the hammer down with the full force of my authority. I signed the document, sealing our inevitable collision. I would stay completely out of his sight, operating from the shadows of the executive suite, watching his every move through the glass partitions of my office. I was about to find out if a bully could actually change his stripes. Marcus started on a Monday. For the first few days, he was the model employee. From the safety of my glass-walled office, which overlooks the main production floor, I watched him work the room. He brought premium donuts for the management team, laughed loudly at the vice president's terrible jokes, and made sure he was always highly visible when the executives were walking the floor. He was a masterclass in upward management. But by Thursday, the mask began to slip. I noticed subtle shifts in his body language depending on who he was interacting with. When he spoke to our janitorial staff or the administrative assistants, his smile vanished. He wouldn't make eye contact. He would snap his fingers to get their attention and hand them tasks without a single please or thank you. It was the classic behavior of a man who only respected people he could use. Then, I saw him zero in on Leo. Leo is a 23-year-old junior analyst who is an absolute genius with data models. But he's incredibly timid. He has terrible social anxiety, wears oversized sweaters, and rarely speaks up in meetings. In many ways, Leo is a perfect mirror image of the teenager I used to be. I watched Marcus approach Leo's desk late on a Friday afternoon. Marcus leaned heavily over Leo's monitors, invading his personal space, invading his comfort zone. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Leo physically shrink into his chair. Marcus patted Leo patronizingly on the shoulder, dropped a massive stack of raw data files onto his keyboard, and walked away laughing to himself. Leo just sat there, staring at the desk, looking completely defeated. A cold, familiar rage ignited in my chest. The game was officially on. Marcus hadn't changed at all. He had just learned how to hide his cruelty from the people who signed his paychecks. He had found his new victim, and he thought nobody was paying attention. I refused to let another young kid be destroyed by this arrogant corporate parasite. The following Tuesday, I decided I needed to get closer to the situation without blowing my cover. I put on a generic company hoodie, grabbed a mug, and walked down to the third-floor break room where the junior teams usually gathered. I timed it perfectly. Marcus was standing by the espresso machine, and Leo was quietly waiting behind him to pour some drip coffee. I stood out of sight behind a frosted glass partition, listening intently. "So, Leo," Marcus's voice drifted over, dripping with that identical, sickeningly sweet condescension I remembered so vividly. "I saw your initial draft for the Delta metrics. It's cute, but it's really messy. Are you sure you're actually cut out for this level of corporate modeling?" "I ran the algorithms exactly as requested, Marcus," Leo stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "The data is totally sound." "Sound isn't enough, buddy," Marcus scoffed. I peeked around the corner just in time to see Marcus step directly into Leo's personal space, forcing the younger man to back up until his shoulders hit the wall. It was the exact same physical intimidation tactic he used in the locker room. "I need perfection. I'm going to take your little spreadsheet and fix it so it's presentable for the big boys. You just sit at your desk and stay quiet. Let the real men handle the board." My blood ran completely cold. The phrase "little spreadsheet" echoed exactly like little computer drawings. I squeezed my coffee mug so hard I thought the thick ceramic was going to shatter in my hands. He was actively stealing Leo's work while simultaneously destroying his confidence, ensuring Leo would never have the courage to complain to management. Marcus turned and strutted out of the break room, completely oblivious to my presence behind the glass. Leo stood by the wall, taking shaky breaths, looking like he wanted to cry. I wanted to march out there and fire Marcus on the spot, but that wasn't good enough. I needed undeniable proof to ensure he would never work in this industry again. I walked straight back to my executive suite, locked the door, and immediately picked up the phone. I called Sarah from HR and our lead IT security director, a brilliant guy named Chun. I asked them both to come to my office for a highly classified, immediate meeting. When they arrived, I didn't mince words. I am launching a quiet, zero-tolerance internal investigation into Marcus Vance, I told them. Sarah looked completely shocked, her eyes widening. David, he's only been here a few weeks. His manager says his output is incredible. His output is a mirage, Sarah, I replied coldly. I want a full, discreet audit of his digital footprint. Chun, I want you to pull every email, every Slack message, and every file transfer Marcus has made since he walked through our doors. Cross-reference his submitted work with the timestamps of Leo's local machine saves. I want to know exactly who is doing the heavy lifting on the Delta project. Chun nodded eagerly, his fingers already itching to start the digital forensics. I'll set up a shadow protocol immediately. He won't know we're watching his traffic. Sarah still looked a bit hesitant, worried about the corporate liability of targeting a new hire. David, if we are investigating him without formal cause, HR needs a documented reason. What exactly are we looking for here? I looked Sarah dead in the eye, my voice dropping an octave. We are looking for severe workplace harassment, blatant intellectual property theft, and systemic abuse of a junior employee. Document every single keystroke. If I am wrong, I will personally apologize to him. But if I am right, we are going to build an absolutely airtight case that leaves him with zero legal recourse. They both felt the intensity in the room and quickly agreed to initiate the protocol. I sat back in my chair, staring at the bustling city below my window. The trap was officially set, and I was going to watch him step blindly inside. It only took 48 hours for Chun to hit the absolute motherlode. He came into my office on Thursday afternoon carrying a secured tablet loaded with encrypted logs. You were completely right, David, Chun said, shaking his head in disgust. This guy is a textbook parasite. Chun pulled up a split-screen timeline. On the left were Leo's private workspaces. On the right were Marcus's emails to the executive team. Timestamp, 11:45 p.m. Leo finishes a complex, 50-page predictive data model and uploads it to the secure team server. Timestamp, 6:15 a.m. Marcus downloads the file, strips Leo's name off the title page, slaps his own logo on it, and emails it directly to the VP of Strategy. Message text, just wrapped up an all-nighter building this new model. Think you'll love my insights. It was sickening, but the theft wasn't even the worst part. Chun showed me the internal communications logs. Marcus was actively sabotaging Leo. He was setting up calendar invites for crucial project meetings, but deliberately excluding Leo from the invite list. When Leo inevitably missed the meetings, Marcus would send BCC'd emails to HR noting Leo's lack of punctuality and disengagement. He was systematically building a fake paper trail to justify firing Leo once the Delta project was complete, ensuring he wouldn't have to share the glory or the massive end-of-year bonus. Marcus was playing a vicious, calculated corporate game, manipulating the system to crush a young kid just to inflate his own ego. It was the locker room all over again, just digitized and weaponized. I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with pure disgust. I told Chun to print hard copies of every single timestamp, email, and stolen document. I wanted physical proof that couldn't be deleted or explained away. I had everything I needed to terminate Marcus immediately. But before I pulled the trigger, I had to make sure Leo was entirely safe. I waited until the floor was relatively empty on a Friday evening before I sent a direct message to Leo, asking him to come up to my office. When he walked in, he looked absolutely terrified. He was pale, sweating slightly, and clutching a notebook to his chest like a shield. He clearly thought he was being fired. Please, Mr. CEO, I know I've missed a few meetings lately, but Marcus said he was handling the scheduling. Leo stammered before I even pointed to a chair. I promise I've been working hard. I can do better. My heart broke for the kid. I walked around my massive desk and sat in the armchair opposite him, trying to make the space feel less intimidating. Leo, take a breath. You are not in trouble. Actually, you are the reason our new data model is functioning so flawlessly. He blinked, totally confused. Marcus said my models were garbage. Marcus is a liar, I said softly but firmly. I gently pushed a printed copy of the server logs across the coffee table. I know he's been stealing your work. I know he's been leaving you off invites. I know how he speaks to you. Leo stared at the paper, his eyes filling with tears. The relief of finally being seen, of knowing he wasn't crazy, washed over him. He spent the next hour pouring his heart out, detailing the psychological abuse, the threats, and the impossible deadlines Marcus had forced upon him. He explained how Marcus constantly threatened to ruin his career if he spoke to HR. Listening to him, I felt my own teenage scars burning. I assured Leo that his job was completely secure, that he was highly valued, and that Marcus would never hurt him again. I told him to go home, rest, and prepare for an interesting week ahead. It was time to arrange a deeply public execution for our fake rockstar middle manager. Marcus had scheduled a massive presentation for the following Wednesday to showcase his breakthrough strategy on the Delta project. He had invited the entire senior leadership team, expecting a grand coronation. It was the absolute perfect stage. I called my assistant and instructed her to RSVP on my behalf, ensuring that the CEO would be the lead executive in the room. I also quietly invited Sarah from HR and explicitly ordered Leo to attend, assuring him that he just needed to sit quietly in the back and watch the show unfold. The day of the meeting arrived. The boardroom was massive, featuring a huge mahogany table and a wall-sized digital display. Marcus was standing at the front of the room, wearing a sharply tailored suit, looking like he owned the entire building. When I walked in and took my seat at the head of the table, he offered me a sickeningly bright smile. "David, so glad the founder could make it to see the new architecture," he beamed. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to react to my own name in his mouth. I just nodded politely and gestured for him to begin. For the first 20 minutes, Marcus put on a spectacular show. He clicked through the slides with immense swagger, taking absolute credit for the complex predictive algorithms that Leo had spent weeks building in the dark. He used all the right buzzwords, soaking up the impressed nods from the senior VPs. He was flying high, completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance. From the back of the room, I saw Leo shrinking into his chair, watching his hard work being paraded around by his tormentor. Marcus clicked to the final, most complex slide of the deck, showing a massive data web. "And this is where my unique genius really solves our bottleneck," he announced proudly. I leaned forward in my leather chair, tapped my pen, and finally sprang the trap. "Fascinating work, Marcus," I interrupted, my voice cutting cleanly through the quiet room. "Can you explain the specific weighting variables you used in the secondary regression matrix on slide 12? Specifically, why you chose a nonlinear decay model for the user retention data?" The entire room went dead silent. The senior VPs turned their heads toward Marcus, waiting for the brilliant answer. Marcus froze. The confident, charming smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Well, David, the secondary matrix is, it's highly dynamic," he stammered, his face flushing deep red. "It's based on overarching synergy models." "That doesn't mean anything," I said coldly, refusing to break eye contact. "It's a simple question about the foundational math of the project you claim to have built from scratch. Let's try another one. What was the exact query syntax you used to extract the raw data from the legacy servers? Because I noticed the timestamp on your extraction claims 6:15 a.m., yet the server logs show the extraction happened at 11:45 p.m. the night before." Marcus started sweating visibly, his hands shaking as he gripped the podium. He looked around the room, desperate for someone to throw him a lifeline, but the executives were now staring at him with mounting suspicion. I'd have to check my notes," he choked out, completely crumbling under the pressure. I looked past him to the back of the room. "Leo," I called out gently, "could you answer those questions for us?" Leo stood up slowly. Despite his nervousness, he flawlessly explained the complex math and the exact query syntax in under 60 seconds. The contrast was devastating. The room instantly understood exactly what had happened. Marcus had been entirely exposed as a fraud in front of the most powerful people in the company. Humiliated and cornered, his fake corporate mask finally completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. The meeting abruptly ended in heavy, awkward silence. The executives filed out quickly, leaving Marcus standing at the podium, staring blankly at his shoes. I stayed in my seat, organizing my folders, giving him enough time to leave. I expected him to go back to his desk and quietly pack his things in absolute shame. I massively underestimated his toxicity. A few minutes later, As I was walking out of the boardroom toward the main open plan office, I heard shouting. I stepped through the glass doors and saw a horrifying scene. Marcus had cornered Leo against a filing cabinet in the middle of the crowded production floor. "You little rat," Marcus hissed loudly, his face contorted with unhinged rage, practically spitting on Leo. "You set me up? You think you can embarrass me in front of the CEO? I am going to destroy your miserable little career. You're nothing." Leo was trembling, holding his hands up defensively. Dozens of employees had stopped typing, frozen in shock as Marcus physically loomed over the smaller kid. It was the locker room all over again. The exact same stance, the exact same vicious tone. My vision literally narrowed. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I just walked out into the center of the floor with absolute, chilling authority. "Marcus," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the dead-silent room like a gunshot. Every single head snapped toward me. Marcus spun around, still panting with anger. He tried to quickly plaster a fake, apologetic smile on his face, but it was far too late. "David, I was just having a firm chat with my subordinate about his insubordination in there." "Stop talking," I commanded, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Step away from Leo right now. Pack exactly what belongs to you in a box. Sarah is waiting for you in the main lobby." I was going to finish this exact same way he started it 15 years ago. I took the private elevator down to the ground floor and waited. The massive glass lobby was perfectly quiet, echoing only with the sound of my dress shoes pacing the marble. Two of my biggest security guards stood by the revolving doors. Finally, the main elevator dinged. Marcus stepped out, holding a small cardboard box of personal items, flanked by Sarah, who held a thick manila folder. He looked utterly humiliated, but there was still a defiant, arrogant sneer on his face as he walked toward me. "This is completely illegal," Marcus spat, his voice echoing in the large space. "You can't fire me for a bad presentation. I'll sue this company into the ground for wrongful termination." I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of him. "You aren't being fired for a bad presentation," I said softly. I reached into Sarah's folder and pulled out the thick stack of printed logs. "You are being fired for severe intellectual property theft, falsifying corporate records, and documented harassment of a junior employee. We have every keystroke. Sue me, and I will personally hand this dossier to every recruiter in the state." I dropped the heavy stack of evidence directly into his cardboard box. He stared at it, his face draining of color. "But there's one more thing," I said, reaching into my tailored jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper and dropped it on top of the evidence. It was a photocopy of my high school yearbook picture. A skinny, terrified 17-year-old kid named Davy. "You ripped up my coding notebooks in the locker room 15 years ago. You told me I'd always be a loser working for guys like you." The moment security handed Marcus his cardboard box, he finally looked into my eyes and realized exactly who I was. His jaw literally dropped. The color completely vanished from his face as the realization hit him like a freight train. He was standing in my building, fired by the very kid he used to terrorize. Marcus didn't say a single word. He couldn't. The utter devastation of his ego was total and complete. He looked at the yearbook photo, looked at the custom suit I was wearing, and then looked at the heavy security guards pointing toward the door. He picked up his box and walked out into the afternoon rain, entirely broken. I stood in the lobby and took a massive, shaking breath. It felt as if a heavy, invisible weight that I had been carrying on my chest for 15 long years simply evaporated. I hadn't just fired a toxic employee. I had finally protected that scared 17-year-old kid in the locker room. The aftermath in the company was incredibly positive. With Marcus gone, Leo completely flourished. I promoted him to a senior analyst position and gave him his own office. Without the constant shadow of abuse, his natural brilliance shone, and he recently led the deployment of the Delta project, which increased our quarterly revenue by 20%. As for Marcus, word of his highly documented termination spread quickly through the industry whisper network. He was quietly blacklisted by every major tech firm in the city. Last I heard, he had moved out of state, working a low-level sales job. Looking back, I learned a crucial lesson about trauma and success. Building a company to prove your haters wrong is a powerful motivator, but it's fundamentally hollow if you don't use that power to protect the vulnerable. True leadership isn't about hoarding authority or punishing your enemies. It's about curating a safe space where talented, quiet people can thrive without fear. I used to be terrified of the bullies of the world, convinced they held all the cards. But now I know the truth about bullies. When you strip away their titles, their stolen credit, and their loud voices, there is absolutely nothing underneath. Sometimes, the absolute best revenge is simply becoming the person your younger self desperately needed.